Hello everyone, in this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to make a simple inventory system in Godot 4. To get started, let's go create a new main scene. Inside of here, let's go create a node 2D. This will be our inventory itself. It's going to add a script to the inventory node. This node is going to be for managing our individual item slots. Let's go add some starter variables. Let's start with our row size, so how many item slots we want in a row. So row size, set this to 10. Next we want our column size. Let's set this to 3, so it'll be 3 by 10. Next, we need a variable to hold all of our items. So items. The best way to handle our items is with a double array, where we can enter in an X value and a Y value to actually get the correct item in the grid. However, Godot doesn't support this out of the box, so we're going to have to do a bit of a workaround to get that. To achieve this, instead of a ready function, so we'll create a new for loop, so for X in, and we'll loop through our row size, so range row size, and we're going to go and populate each X with its own array. So items.append a blank array. And now we'll loop through the Y as well to get the grid. So Y in range column size. Now we'll access items X dot append a blank array. We have now created a two-dimensional array. It no longer has just one line of indices. We can access both the X and the Y indices. So for example, let's do items. Let's input 5 for the X and then 2 for the Y. And let's just set this to hello. Now, hello is placed at the 5th of the row and 2 of the column size in the index. And if we do print items and press run, you'll see that we have all of our rows and we have hello right here. Now let's take a quick break from our inventory to create the actual item slots. So let's create a new scene. It will be a node 2D scene. Let's call item slot. Okay, in here, let's create a new color rect to symbolize our slot. This is our blank slot. We also need a sprite to symbolize our actual item that's in the slot. So this will be called our item icon. And let's go add a default texture to it just to make sure that we have it at the right size. So let's go and drag this down to fit within our slot. And now once we have that scaled correctly, we can just go ahead and get rid of the texture inside of there. Let's also go ahead and name this slot as well. Now later on, we will need to know if we've actually clicked this slot or not. So let's go add a button. And now after you've got that scaled up properly, head over to visibility, self-modulate, and alpha, drag that down to 0. And finally, we need a label to actually tell us how many items are within the slot. So let's go add a label. Let's just call it item count label. Let's go ahead and drag it in to be within the bounds of the slot. I'm also going to set the initial value to be 0. We can't see it right now, so we need to set the visibility, self-modulate, down to black. We also need it to be on the right-hand side. So now if we enter in, let's say 99, it will properly fit within that square. Now let's go ahead and add a script to it. We don't need these two functions. However, we will need a few variables, one of which being our slot number, which will be which slot we are in the grid. This will be a vector 2. Since this is a coordinate system, so we won't have any decimals. We also need our actual item that's held within here, item, which will be a dictionary. And we don't need to have multiple items stored in one slot because it will all be the same item. So we only need a count of how many items. So variable item count, we'll set this to be 0. Heading back over to our inventory script now, we need to go ahead and spawn in all of these item slots. First off, we need to go ahead and preload in our item slot. So go ahead and control drag over this. And we'll have our item slot constant. Now let's go to create a variable instance. Set this to be item slot dot instantiate. We also need to set the position of our slots. So instance dot global position. Set this to be a vector 2 of x times 50 and y times 50. We also need to set the instance dot slot num, which is this variable that we created earlier. Set this to be a new vector 2I, passing in our x and y values. Now let's go ahead and add this to the scene. So add child instance. We also need to add this to our items. So items x, y, instance. I'm going to just add in a simple camera 2D. If we press play, you'll see we have our inventory. Before we move on, I'm going to put these into a folder. So let's create an inventory folder. Grab the inventory item slot and item slot.gd, put those into the inventory. We also need to update the item slot. So this will be inventory slash item slot now. Let's also create a new folder called items. So items, inside of here, let's create a new script. This will be item.gd. This is going to be our resource script for our items. So let's delete everything in here. And instead of extending node, we need to extend resource. We'll also set the class name to be item. Now we need a few variables in here, one of which is going to be our name. So at export variable name, this will be a string. Next, let's do some item types. So at export enum, let's do tool, food, or block. This will be a variable type of string. We also need a inventory icon. So at export variable inventory icon, this will be a texture 2D. We also need a maximum stack amount, such as 64. So at export variable stack amount, this will be an int. We also need a path to the item to know how to instantiate it when we're removing it from our inventory. So at export variable item path will be a string. Now I'm going to create two new folders, one of which being our item art. So item art, and also our item icons. So item icons. For these, I highly recommend having everything be the same resolution, so 64 by 64 for example. I've gone ahead and added some art for a hot dog item, so let's create a new folder called item scenes. Let's create a new scene. This will be a no 2D scene. Let's call it hot dog. Now I'm going to add some art to the scene for our hot dog. Going to scale this down to 0.215. We also need a button for when we want to actually select the item and put it into our inventory. So scale this up. I'm also going to set the alpha value to 0. We need a timer value as well to have a slight cooldown where when we place the item outside of the inventory to disable the button so we don't accidentally put it right back into our inventory. This will make more sense in a bit. I'm just going to set this to be 0.1, have it on the physics process, and one-shot auto start. Let's go create a new script on our hot dog. It's going to connect the timeout of our timer to the script. Now we need to reference our button. So button dot disabled gets false. We also need to initially set it to be disabled on the button itself. So disabled. We're going to need two variables, one of which being our item resource. So at export variable item resource. This will be an item. We also need to reference our inventory item. So at on ready variable inventory. This will be set to inventory. Instead of our actual hot dog item, we need to create a new item resource. So new item. Let's call it hot dog. Our type will be food. Our icon will be our items. Item icon, hot dog. And second out, let's do 8. For our item path, go to right click on your hotdog.tscn and copy path and then paste that in. Now I'm going to drag a few of these into our main scene for when we need to test. Now, usually when you pick up an item in Minecraft or another game, it will delete the item that was originally on the ground and kind of just make a log of it and put a visualizer for it. However, the way that Godot and most other game engines handle resources is by passing them by reference, which means that once we delete the actual resource, we can no longer access its properties. So we will need to convert our item resource over to a dictionary. Heading over to our inventory script now, let's go to create a function that we'll be using before adding the item to the inventory. So function prep item to prep the item. We'll be passing in the item reference, so new item. Now we'll be creating a temporary dictionary, so item dictionary. Now all we need to do is just transfer all the values from the item resource to the item dictionary. So, for example, item name will be set to new item dot item resource dot name. And now we do this for all the values, just like this. Now it's going to return that item dictionary that we just created. Let's go to create an add item helper function. So function add item, we'll pass in that item. Then we need to find the first available open slot. So for y in range column size, for x in range row size. Let's go create a temporary slots variable. So slot we set to items x and y. Now before we finish this, we need to create a new function inside of our item slot to actually allow us to add the item. So function add item, pass in the new item. Now we need to go and check a few things before actually being able to add the item, such as if we can actually add the item to a pre-existing stack or add a new item to a blank slot. So for the pre-existing stack, we'll do if item count is not equal to 0, meaning that there is already a stack, and the item name, which is the item name of that stack, is equal to the new item dot name. So essentially, if they are the same item. And one final thing we need to check for this condition is if our item count is less than the item's maximum stack amount. So we can't add to a stack of 8, for example, with these hot dogs. So we check all this, or the current item is equal to a blank dictionary. So essentially, if this if statement passes, that means that we have found a slot where we can add the item to. So we need to add 1 to our item count. Item count plus gets 1. We need to set our item to be the new item. We also need to set our item icon, which is inside of our item slot. We need to reference that inside of here. Set the item icon dot texture to that of the item inventory icon. We also need to wait to update the label count. So let's also reference our label. Let's create a new function called refresh label. We'll go ahead and take in that label dot text, set that to be str of our item count. And now we'll go ahead and refresh that label and return true. And if this doesn't work, that means that we didn't add an item to the slot, so return false. Now heading back into our inventory script, let's go ahead and finish up this function by calling if slot.add item, which is that function that we just created, passing in the item. This will return true if we've added the item to the slot, so we'll return true here as well. And if we haven't successfully added the item, we'll keep looping through empty slots or slots that might have the same item. However, if we haven't added the item at all, we need to return false, meaning that we haven't added the item. Back at our hot dog item now, let's go and connect our button, so on button pressed, to our hot dog script. In here, we need to call the inventory add item function, so if inv.add item, we'll pass in inventory.prep item, which will prep the item into a dictionary, pass in our self, which will be our resource, and if this returns true, which is essentially if this right here returns true, which means that this returns true, then we can delete our item. So right now I have the stack amount for the hot dog at 1. If I press play, you'll see that we can add each one individually to slots. However, if I go to up this to, let's say 4 for the max stack, I can add all 3 to the same slot. And so now if I go over the stack amount, it will start looping to the next available slot. Now we need a way to be able to drag around items, say put them into different slots or drag them outside of the inventory. So in our main scene, I'm going to go and create a new node 2D. This will be our hand. So just call it hand. We also want to have a texture on our hand that will represent the item that we're holding. So this will be a sprite 2D. I've gone ahead and scaled down the texture a little bit. I'm going to call it item icon. Now let's add a script to our hand. Go clear out these 2 functions. We need a few variables, one of which being a reference to our item icon. There will also be times when we can't drop the item, so I'll say can drop, so this to be true. We also need an item that we're holding, so variable item, so this to be a blank dictionary. We also need to have how many items we're holding, so item count, so this to be 0. Now because this is a hand, we need to have it be following the mouse, so function physics process delta global position, so this to be get global mouse position. Now we need to have a way to add an item to our hand, so function add item, input a new item and also the item count. Then here we'll set our item to be the new item. We'll set our item count to be count, and also our item icon dot texture to be item inventory icon. Now to test this, let's head over to our item slot, connect our button, so on button pressed. We'll need to have a way to reference our hand, so at on ready variable hand, we'll get, then I believe it will be up here and then hand. Now we need to check a few things before adding it to our hand. One of which being if our hand.item is equal to blank, meaning that we don't already have an item in our hand, and also if our item in the slot is not equal to blank, meaning that we have an item in the slot. And we're going to need to call a function here that we have not yet created. So we need to reference our inventory at onReady variable inventory. So this to be inventory. Back down to here, we need to call inventory.remove item, and then the slot number. In our inventory now, we need to create a function that will actually take out the item from the inventory and put it into our hand. So we'll do this by creating the new remove item function. So remove item, taking in that slot number that we're providing from the item slot. We'll create a new variable slot, which will be items, taking the slot number dot x, and also the slot number dot y. We'll first check if the slot dot item is not equal to null. Then we'll also check if hand dot item is blank. This is basically the same checks that we made before. And then if these two pass, we'll call hand dot add item, passing in the slot dot item for our item, and then 1 for the item count, since we're only adding 1 item. Now we need to actually remove the item from the slot. So we'll first check if slot dot item count is equal to 1, meaning that this is the last item in the slot. If it is, then we need to completely remove it. So slot.item will get a blank dictionary, and slot.item icon.texture, set this to be null. And whether this is the last item or not, we need to do slot.item count decrement by 1. Then we will slot.refresh the label. Now, if we click on a slot that has an item in it, it will take it out of the slot, put it into our hand, and decrement it by 1. And if it's the last item in the slot, then it will completely take it out. Next, let's make a way to drop the item outside of our inventory. So let's create a new function called drop item. We'll take in no arguments. We'll first check if we actually have an item. So if item is not equal to a blank dictionary. If so, create a for loop for all of the items in our item count. And for each item in the item count, we want to instantiate it. So instance gets load. We're going to be loading the item path dot instantiate. We're going to be setting the instance dot global position to be that of our mouse position. So global, get global mouse position. And we'll reference the root of our scene dot add child instance. And then we want to clear it out of our hand. So item icon dot texture gets null. Item will get a blank item, and then item count gets 0. I've gone ahead and quickly made a left click key map. Then in here, we'll create a function input event. We'll check if the event dot is action pressed, that left click that we just created. Then we'll check if we can drop. Then we will drop item if we can drop. So now, if we pick up our item and we click outside, we'll drop it. However, right now we have a problem where if I pick up the item and I want to place it back into my inventory, it'll just spawn it in still. The only problem is I haven't quite figured out how to do this yet. Ha! I got you! I don't know why I made this joke. Thank you for watching this video. So to start, we need to first detect if we are inside or outside of the inventory. But we can do this by simply checking if our mouse is over a slot or not. So, we gotta connect the mouse entered and the mouse exited to our button. And then so if our mouse is within the slot, we want to set hand.can drop to be false. And then if we've exited, then we want to set hand.can drop to be true. And then back at our button press now, we want to check if we have an item. So if hand.item is not equal to a blank dictionary, then we want to call hand.add items, passing in our item count, and also our slot number. Back in our hand script now, let's go create that function. Function add items, taking in a new item, slot count, and also the slot number. Now we first need to check if the slot has an item already. So if new item is not equal to a blank dictionary, then we'll check if our item name is not the same as our new item name, meaning that they're not the same item. And if so, we'll go ahead and just return right here and not move forward. However, if new item is a blank dictionary, then we'll simply set new item to be item. Now we need to calculate the amount of items that we want to add from our hand to our inventory. So variable amount will be a minimum between item count and our new item stack amount minus our slot count. Let's now check if that amount is greater than or equal to the amount of items in our hand, meaning that we're transferring our entire hand to the inventory. So item icon dot texture will be set to null. Our item will become a blank dictionary, and our item count will be reset to 0. However, if this is not all of our items in our hand, we want to subtract that amount from our item count. So item count minus gets amount, and then now we'll run through a for loop. So for I in amount, inventory dot items get the slot number dot x and the slot number dot y dot add item, and we'll be adding the new item the I amount times in the amount. So now you see, if I grab an item, I can place it anywhere inside of the inventory. Let's do one more thing. Instead of removing just one item, we'll remove an entire stack. So function remove stack, also take in the slot number. Now this will be mostly the same to removing an item. We'll go and copy over the first couple lines of code up until the hand.add item. However, instead of going outside of this if statement, we need to be inside of it, since if we don't have any items, then we can't remove a stack. And since we're removing everything, we'll do slot.item count, set this to be 0. Then we'll go and refresh that label, so slot.refresh. We'll set slot.item icon texture to be null. And we'll go ahead and set slot.item to be a blank dictionary. And this is all that we need to do. And one more thing I forgot to do is inside the add item, we need to do slot.item count to pass in all the items from our stack to our hand. So now in my item slot, instead of removing an item, remove a stack. So now if I take an entire stack out, you'll see that I can place it all into another slot. And if I place some in here where there's already one, I'll have one remaining. And if I take a stack out and place it here, I'll actually have all 4 items spawn in. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyways guys, I hope you found this story helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.